Buzz, welcome back to the podcast.
Nick, it's always good to talk with you. I wish it was under slightly different circumstances. I like to see you out there in the lake, but today you're going to fill us in on a very tragic accident that took place on October 8th.
Yes, tragic. It absolutely was. That's right. That's the intent of this podcast is to talk through what happened. I think, within the surfski community, it when it first happened, there was word it spread a little bit. Actually, not a lot. I think the community was very respectful of not giving it some time and normally though in the surf ski and paddle community at large, when these things do happen, you know really the only thing we can do is learn and go forward, with the lessons learned and do better next time. And so that is something I have always planned to do. This is a starting point for doing that. I think there's probably will be more to come. Maybe I will do more podcast interviews with some of the different people who were there. Probably do some writing at some point because like these always are. There's a lot of complexity. There's a lot of nuance to it all. It's much more than the sound bits that hit the mainstream media and even the social media channels. As I
Right.
think
You were there. You
I
were
was
there.
there.
You were
Yes.
on the scene. You studied this. You've talked to other people. And of course, you're an expert on the Great Lakes themselves, which hopefully we're going to hear a little bit from you about. But to me, I think just like everyone else, I was just shocked. Someone died in a surf ski downwind race. It's like, wow. So I appreciate you sharing this. And again, this is just so everyone can learn. There's no sensationalism whatsoever. We
No.
always talk about the people who win races, people who do amazing things, but we learn best from failure, from
That's right.
mistakes. So I think this is going to be an excellent way for the rest of us to learn.
That's right. Yeah, it was gut wrenching. Close probably the worst day, one of the worst days of my life to finish a race, and then that news starts to come in, just undescribable. And I hope no one ever has to live through that. Um, so
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
Nick, can I ask you just to get us, I like I said, I paddled quite a bit on Lake Michigan. Other people are going, lakes, what, frogs, turtles? So in
Yeah.
case people aren't clear, could you fill the listeners in on Lake Michigan, the Great Lakes, and why it's the real deal?
Yeah, I think, in simplest terms, and we'll get into this a little more in detail further into the podcast when I describe the actual race course. But we're on open water, and in this particular case, we had 60 miles of open fetch, so wide open water with no obstructions. We've got wind blowing at 20 knots, and the waves were solid 6 to 7 foot, where we launched at. So it was no joke. It was, it was formidable, for sure. And yeah, so I'm going to come in. We'll definitely get into more of that because I think it's important to understand. But let me take a step back and just kind of set the context of racing in the Great Lakes, downwind racing, and in Michigan, and over the years, I've been in business for 10 years. 10 years ago, we had a little race in Traverse City. It kind of ran for a couple of years. It was in August. It was in a bay, so it was somewhat protected, um, but still a decent sized bay. Um, that race fell apart, not because of any incidents, but just management and stuff. So we kind of lost traction there. Um, there was another race down in a little bit south of you in Michigan City, on the south end of Lake Michigan, and that was intended to be a downwind race. They point to point, 18 miles, and the thing with downwind, there's still not that many guys across the Great Lakes that want to come race downwind. So Um, you know, they ran that race. They had a year where it was really good downwind conditions. There was guys that drove, 12, 13, 14 hours from Minnesota, from Wisconsin, all over Michigan, and they canceled it because, they didn't have a permit to run on a small craft advisory kind of day. I think was maybe one of the reasons, um, but the point being, there's been kind of some attempts to run downwind races, but it's not something that's kind of in the culture. It's not something that our uh, sheriff's departments and the DNR and the different organizations really understand, or and so really got very little traction. We had one that was successful for a while up in Sheboygan that ran 14 miles, semi-protected. We had great conditions, usually 1.5 foot waves, nothing big, nothing crazy. It ran along the shoreline. COVID came along and kind of, as it did with a lot of races, it sort of wiped that one out. So in the last couple of years, I think most of us that really care about paddling and racing downwind have just kind of resolved to the fact that, it's very difficult to do. It's hard to plan. You can't, planning around the wind, and getting qualified people to the starting line. So most of us, we go out to the gorge and race. Some of us go to Hawaii and race, and we dream about going to Australia. And on my bucket list, hopefully sooner than later. But basically, we've just kind of all resolved to the fact that we're really not going to race downwind in Michigan, and I'm kind of okay with that. So kind of where I was at this summer, and where most of the other guys I think were. And then about midsummer, one of the guys in Wisconsin reached out to me and said, "Hey, you heard about this Inspiration Point downwind?" No, I knew nothing about it. I have no idea. What is this? And it turns out that it's a foundation for the 22, which is a foundation that's put on the race, which is all about getting veterans out and with paddling, running, biking, just being active and helping them to rehabilitate from PTSD and depression and those things. So it's great foundation. The founder had been stationed in Hawaii for a few years, and that's where he took up surfing, and surfing led to stand-up paddleboarding. Um, so he, excited to really showcase downwinding in Michigan, in Lake Michigan. And so he, with a small core group, they ran kind of a by invite only trial race last year. I think it was all SUPs. I know for a fact there weren't any surfski guys or anyone, but they ran it and they had a great time. It worked out well, and I think he decided let's open this up now, to more of the wider public. But it was, so on their website, it was very clear they were looking for extreme conditions. They were looking for 20-knot winds, 6-foot waves. So it was clear that, they had a permit to run a race in those kind of conditions. And they were very clear that if you were not experienced in these type of conditions, that, Lake Michigan can be very extreme. And in October, more so. October is, when I first saw that it was in October, I kind of thought, we just don't know what we're going to get in October. It could be 70 degrees, it could be 60-degree water, and it could be a nice 2-foot conditions, which would be amazing. And lots of people could get out there and have fun. But we also know in October we can get 40-degree days. We can get, high 40-degree, high 40. Usually we would expect 50s, and we'll get to the water temp thing in a little bit, because that was very unique on this day. But yeah, so, and they also had then a vetting process. So you couldn't just sign up for the race. You had to apply first. You had to give them your credentials, what you've done, races, paddling, etc. And they kind of had a vetting process around that to get.
So what the outside observer sees is that they got the exact conditions they wanted, and they had a vetting process, and so everything was what they expected. So we're all kind of going, so what went sideways when they got just what they wanted?
Yeah. So so that yeah so that so we did have that. So I got signed up. A couple of my friends, we had a couple guys from Duluth that came down for it. So that's, for people that don't know, it's about a 12, 13-hour drive. So not a small voyage. Guys from Wisconsin, from Ohio. So it wasn't a big group. I think in surfskis in total, maybe there was 9 or 10, just to kind of give the context. Um, but there were people that traveled from all over. So the area that where the race was, it's about 30, 40 miles along the coastline south of me. So I'm not real familiar with. I know in Frankfurt, it's a big surf capital, kite surfers, wing surfers, those guys go there because on a south southwest wind, it can the waves get really big because it's very unprotected. It's kind of the whole, Lake Michigan is 300 miles long vertically, um, and that's all pretty unobstructed. And so um, I went out there in on the Friday of Labor Day weekend. I had done what they were hoping to be the race course. Was about 11-mile stretch, runs north to south. Um, Rob Hartman and I went out there, and Rob's kind of one of the other top paddlers. He was on the U.S. national team. He's competed with the best of the best in the world, and very, very accomplished. Um, he and I did a 12-mile downwind of the race course. I think this was like one of the first days in September on a true 6 foot day, and I finished going, okay, if we get this in October and it's a cold one, it's pretty serious. It's a pretty and mostly that day, what it was, and we talked a little bit about this, is that if you run north to south to north, you come up into Frankfurt, and there's a massive pier wall that jets out, and then it angles, and so you have all the wave action, coming in and hitting against that wall. I don't know the length of the wall, but I want to say, quarter mile. It feels like it's a sizable, and I've paddled Hawaii. I've paddled, quite a bit of stuff at this point, and coming into that approach into that was some of the craziest conditions I've ever seen. Just
Right,
8 foot
right.
haystacking and
A
just white
stacking is just
knuckle.
nuts.
Yeah,
I paddled into Frankfurt. Actually, I think I told you this last month when we started this conversation. I was coming in Frankfurt, and I said, I don't got this because if you roll over, I can get back in. But if you roll over, you're going to go into that concrete breakwater, which isn't giving me any fun at all.
yeah,
And like you said, the haystacking is totally unpredictable. It
yeah,
just pops up right underneath your bow. You can fall off to the left, fall off to the right. You can't even tell which side to brace. So I just surfed it into the shore and then picked it up and carried it over the breakwater and went into
yeah,
the harbor. But yeah, it gets interesting.
yeah. So I finished that paddle and kind of thought, okay, I really hope we don't get an actual 6 foot day, because that's going to be that'll be something out there. But I just kind of thought, okay, we'll watch the weather. We'll see how things kind of play out. And generally, through September, we had really nice conditions. The water's hovering. It's just kind of falling off 70 basically most of the month, and down in the mid high 60s. By end of September, we started getting some nasty days, some big north systems coming down, blowing hard, and got some cold days kind of that last week in September. But overall, still pretty solid. So kind of watching water temps across the lake, and kind of as we kind of get closer to the race day, that week I was out in Leland, which is north of where we were racing, 30, 40 miles. We were still at like 64, 5 water temp. maybe 64, but it was still, no gloves, no hats, no boots, and comfortable as far all the way up like Tuesday, Wednesday before the race. These were the conditions we were paddling in. Thursday came north. The wind came out of the north, got a little cooler. Um, but then I was looking at the buoy. There's a buoy 5 miles offshore from where we started the race, and that one was reading colder, and I couldn't figure it out. It was reading, even maybe this is Thursday, Friday, reading like 48, and I thought it's just strange. Why? Looking at all the other buoys, and they're all up in the high, at least mid 50s to high 50s, 60. Um, and that was concerning a little bit, but I kind of thought, well, maybe it's off. Maybe the sensor's off on that buoy. Turns out, on the day of the race, it was probably 46, 47, where we started the race.
Right.
And
And that's an interesting aspect, a very important aspect, because people offhand think, well, in surf, you're going to drown. Drowning isn't the problem. Hypothermia is the issue.
yeah,
Like the Titanic went down calm seas, 46, 47. That was the temperature of the North Atlantic with icebergs. And you're not going to last very long at those temperatures.
yeah, yeah. And the fall, I mean, there's so many things obviously in hindsight and in retrospect and stuff, but I think one of the transition seasons, and fall, spring is deadly. Fall can be as well, because I think, and maybe there's some psychology too, but I sometimes I catch myself, you're kind of in denial about it getting colder. You just don't want to face the reality that it can be colder. It's getting colder, but you know, um, you're used to paddle. You kind of thinking optimistically that we can get a few more days, maybe another week before I need booties, or before I need gloves, or before I need heavy neoprene. And so earlier in that week, it was kind of that way. But so midweek, it's starting to shape up. The wind forecast is starting to solidify, and it's looking like it's going to be. Um, it's not going to be a north-south wind. So the kind of the first preferred, I think probably the preferred race course route was kind of off the table, because it wouldn't work. The wind was basically directly onshore at that point. And let me share my screen, and I can I think a lot of people will just listen to this in audio, and that's fine. But if somebody will put it out on YouTube in case people want to look at the um, yeah. So here, can you see? Just confirm here, as you can see where I'm my Garmin track here, Google Map. Um, so this is Frankfurt, kind of sits here, and you can see, we have this, it's all wide open, Lake Michigan. This is about 70 miles across. And so I think, the main route they were looking at was these between Frankfurt and Arcadia. So there's little inlets at both places. It's all pretty accessible beach that can be walked, or ran the whole beach. And on a north or a south, it was going to run north or south. We didn't end up, we had, the wind was west going to west southwest, so it was kind of coming in here, and it was going to roll here. So having this big point, it gave them the option to, we could run a race, with the west southwest wind, and that was the call. Really, the only option for a downwind was basically launching off of this point here, which is Point Betsy, and we had about this is in kilometers, my Garmin track, but we had about a 15K race here to the finish. So they announced, kind of midweek, that this was the course we were going to take. we had so let me back up a little bit, kind of seeing the wind. The, I was seeing reports saying 3 to 5 foot was enough that I was, I was a little concerned. I thought, I will take, I've been paddling with V12 for the last 2 or 3 months. That's what I plan to race. But I thought, let me put the V8 on the car just in case somebody needs it. They can paddle it. Just good to have a super stable boat as an option, out there. So, so I did that. I put that boat on. Um, and so the morning of the race, um, we met 8 a.m. At Frankfurt for a mandatory safety meeting. And the race organizers, they did say that there was going to be surf where we were launching. Kind of the only launch option we had was going to be direct into the wind, directly into the oncoming shore break, um, fully exposed, no protection there. And it wasn't stressed, but they said the water would be about 48. I think they were looking at the same buoy readings that I was seeing. Um, and their recommendation was 3 mil neoprene. Um, and so they covered that. It wasn't, some of us have been out to the gorge and we kind of laugh at, we don't laugh, but the race director Carter is very, very dramatic in the pre-race and the safety meetings. Just really, I'm pretty experienced paddler, but there's been days when I've been very nervous there just listening to his pre-race talk. But it's very much what's needed. I think he does an amazing job. But every personality is different, and the guys that were running this race, I think they assumed everybody there. We're all very experienced. We all know what we're looking at. And they didn't instill the fear of God in us at that point. Um, but it was cold. It was cold that morning. So you knew, I mean, we were freezing. The wind was coming in. So you knew it was a cold day. There were kind of um, there was no getting around that. Um, so um, we had the race meeting, then we all kind of dispersed, and um, there was a group of us staying at a friend's place. Um, Long story short, we kind of, our little group of four, we didn't time it very well, and so we kind of screwed up the shuttle timing and kind of got to the race um, starting point, um, which, conditions were changing through the day. But I will point out that we had our race meeting here in Frankfurt. We hadn't had eyes on the start until we got there, and we got there a little late, so things were a little scrambled. Trying to figure out gear and stuff. And I'll zoom in here a little bit. Um, right away we were looking at the launch point, and I saw the surf, and I knew it was formidable. I knew people were going to struggle. It was about 300 meters of breaking waves, and breaking solid. When you look out and you see them 200, 300 meters offshore, and they're just still dumping hard, lots of white water, that those are bigger than they look from shore. That's going to be a serious undertaking. It's going to take, what it takes to get out through that stuff. A lot of strength and a lot of stability in your boat. And one of the guys that was with us was an outrigger. There was two outrigger canoes there, and he had moved to Duluth about a year ago from Kauai. So 7 years in Kauai, very active in the paddling community there, racing, paddling, etc. Um, and I didn't, and this is kind of a lesson learned about race directors. And I think the guys that organized this race really, in all fairness, they didn't have a lot of experience or knowledge about surf skis or outrigger canoes. They were SUP guys. That's what they knew. Um, and I didn't know that outriggers have they have a much harder time going out through surf than the surf skis do. With the AMA, I won't even be able to articulate it all correctly, but it is harder for them. Surf skis, um, a lot of people would argue that they're made for going through the surf. That's kind of their origin. That's their history, um, which is true. And I think, the guys that can get into it in Australia and Hawaii and South Africa, that's how they start as kids and surf lifesaving, which is a sport where they live in the surf, um, and they get pounded in the surf. It's a different kind of surf zone on the ocean. It's a groundswell. It's bigger, but it's less frequent, right? So you can learn to time around it, and it's definitely a different animal. But a big dumping wave is a big dumping wave, and I think, and I've seen this at other races around the country. A lot of the paddling community here, if you don't get exposed to those kind of surf conditions, it's very foreign. Maybe you have a protected launch area, or however it works. You just don't spend a lot of time in surf, and you see a lot of paddlers. When we do camps, when Oscar was coming, we drill it into people the right way to enter the boat. Um, and you realize on a day like this that it all makes a big difference. Being able to get in the boat correctly, holding the paddle correctly, all of it is so very critical. Um, but
Well,
but
Nick, so how is this going? So it's cold water, like 46 to 48 degrees. The air is kind of cold. You're launching directly into surf. And like you said, unlike in the ocean, the interval is very fast. It's like 4 to 6 seconds. So
yeah,
you have very little time to recover. You can't really build up speed. You have 8 to 10 surf skiers, a couple suppers. Wow, good luck to them. And the guy in the OC. So how did the launch go? I mean, were people breaking out through the surf, or were they struggling? What did that look like?
yeah. So let me kind of go on it. Let me get to that here real quick. So one thing we're kind of scrambling. It looked like maybe there was a little protection here around this point. There's a lighthouse here, and then you can kind of see. And so there was some discussion on, could we get over here to launch? The waves looked a little more spaced out, just a little less intense, but it turns out that was private property, and so the race directors really couldn't get over there. So it's kind of this, lots of scrambling. Rob Hartman and I kind of, and more on this theme, but we were not nervous for ourselves. We were nervous for some of the other people that were there. Actually, not really even, Nick Walton, who was the one who got drove, wasn't the first one on our mind. There were a couple others that we were nervous about. We both decided to take our stable boat. So Rob had a V7, I had a V8. We kind of made a decision there that, we don't really care that much about racing this. There's 9 guys. It's not that important to either one of us about racing. So we kind of said, okay, let's take our stable boats. That way, if we need to help anybody, or if anybody needs to jump in them, we can switch boats or something. We can do that. So we're scrambling that. We make that decision. We get down to the beach, and yeah, so we have it's loud. It's chaotic. One of the other things that's kind of on everybody's mind is, zoom in here a little bit. You see these little fingers coming off of this point, and these are little metal piers, rusted, sharp metal that kind of jets out, that's buried, left over from docks or whatever was there. And so it definitely makes it sketchy. Kind of everybody's a bit concerned about, if you lose your boat in the surf, it's going to could get blown into one of these, and these would just kind of wreck the boat. Thankfully, these didn't go out too far, um, but it was, just one more factor. So we got down. I don't, remember a lot on the beach, but we basically, that said, okay, everybody's here. We're going to start the surf skis, and then a minute later the outriggers, and then a minute later or a couple minutes later the sups will go. Um, so, so they launched the surf skis. Rob and I had kind of thought, maybe we wait a little bit, see if everybody gets out, um, and then we'll kind of follow. And it's kind of sweep slash race again. We weren't fully committed to either one. We were kind of concerned enough that we wanted to start after, but um, we were kind of. And another thought that we had, and this is just trying putting it all, telling the whole story, is there was a thought that maybe we as a group we all get out through the surf and then we try to gather up and start the race outside of the surf zone. Um, but we discussed that, but we thought, well, it's going to be hard to keep everybody together out there. People are going to be getting cold. We could be waiting for a while, and we may not know if somebody decides to turn back. And so it was sort of, we're kind of discussing that. And I think, I don't know, somebody, the race director said, just go, guys. Um, so we launched. There were, I think, 9 surf skis in the first launch. And a couple people were having trouble right away. Um, just there was a girl, Mary, who couldn't really make any progress through the waves. So within a minute or two, she decided, this was too much. There was another guy, Brad, who customer of mine's been into surfski for a couple of years. He was struggling, but got out, got through a couple of waves and was kind of out there. There was Tim Trainer, who has been paddling for the last 3 years, almost daily on Lake Superior. He paddles all year round. He's been a lot of big stuff. He got dumped a couple times, but he was well dressed. He had all his leashes on, and he eventually worked his way out. So a couple guys that had 2 or 3 spills in the surf zone, which is not, that unheard of in a surf zone like that. But the thing is, once you get through it all, then it's not bad once you're out. And we kind of knew that based on the course, it was going to get smaller as we went, because gradually everything was going to get more blocked. And so, we knew, and people that had been at the finish knew it was fairly flat at the finish. So it was really just, get out through the first 300 meters, which is, you're going to take 10 or 12 waves just crashing on your face. They're going to hit you hard, might take the wind out of you. The water was cold. They're going to back surf you at times. You're going to, go backwards, especially if you don't have a lot of power. And, I think some of the people struggled because in surf ski, a common technique we use to be stable is to put your legs out. When in doubt, legs out. We teach people that makes you stable, but it makes it very hard to move forward because now your legs are dragging and you really can't make forward progress through that pounding break. So in the end, there was a few of us that got out, no problem, no tipping over, got out through the surf zone. There was a couple that had a couple swims, 2 or 3, worked their way out, never had an issue after that. And there was 3 people. Nick Walton was one of them. Brad and John, who was on the outrigger canoe, who really were in the surf zone, getting beat up for a while. And so talk about Brad for a minute. He was in total in the water for about 20 minutes. He was, I think, kind of close to Nick for a lot of it. He, after about 10 minutes of constantly getting flipped over and not making progress, he decided to turn around. At that point, he was really just wrapped onto the boat, holding on, couldn't sit up in the boat anymore. Let the boat push him in, got into shore. But when he got into shore, he was in pretty serious no medical emergency personnel or anything were called or treated him or anything, but I talked to him after the race. He said he was at like stage 2 or stage 3 hypothermia. And he was wearing, I thought he had a full dry suit, but he was just wearing like a splash top and a splash pants kind of setup. But I think it was basically leaking a lot of water in. It wasn't latex seals at the wrist, at the neck, at the feet. So he wasn't fully dry in his gear, and got very cold. So you can imagine, let me back up for a minute and talk about, the safety plan going in was discussed. It was discussed at the safety meeting, and the plan was that there would be spotters on shore. We all had little reflective strobe lights that we were wearing on our right shoulder, and the idea was that there was several spotters with binoculars who were going to be following everybody. They had radios, and they would be in radio communication with a jet ski pulling a sled that would be on the course and in radio communication. In addition, there would be 2 sweepers on stand-up paddleboards who would go after everybody else with the intent of sweeping the course.
Well, they're going to have to be world-class stand-up paddlers if they're sweeping the course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on that note, one of them did have problems getting launched and had to be rescued. And so it turned out there was just one, which was Josh, the race organizer, was out on the sup sweeping. So let me I think it helps to see the map here, and I'll talk about it, but for those just listening on audio, you had about 300 meters to get out through the surf, and so launching, and I think, kind of a theory on what happened is that you have to go directly in through those waves to get out. You're just perpendicular, pound, pound, pound. You have to get out through that surf zone. And then once you do, then you can kind of make your turn. You can sort of see what I did on my route. I didn't turn hard right. I kind of did a soft right and got a little more distance because I just wanted to get more distance off the shore before I turned. But, the guys struggling, there was also, this being a point, there's a lot of current, wind and current moving. And so in this kind of 300 meters off the shore zone, where all the surf was happening, the people in here, once you were out through that, you wouldn't have seen them. So your only option, was to go straight out through it and then turn right. But once you turn right, these are, 6-7 foot waves, swells, and you're not seeing the guys who are inside of you, closer into shore anymore. So I don't know for fact. My theory assumption is that, Josh in the sweeping paddleboard would have had to go out through the surf, and he would have not been able to see the guys that were still struggling in the surf zone. So to try to, and I haven't talked to all the spotters, so I can, some of this is, just kind of gathering what I know, but there was a few people, one of the guys who was going to race decided that conditions were too much for him, so he wasn't racing, but he quickly volunteered to help with spotting people. And so we had some people on the beach, but they're basically, they watch a handful of people that tip over, but ultimately get out through the break, and then they're off and going, and they're totally fine. And then there's 3 guys, Brad, John, and Nick, who are, struggling in the break for a longer period of time. Brad decides to come in, so they're kind of tracking him in. They're helping him get his boat and helping him get out of the water. So John is in the outrigger canoe, very experienced paddler, but not had not gone through that kind of surf. You know, even in Hawaii, had not launched through that intense of a kind of constant surf break. And one of the things I think is that, you know, maybe there's some luck. Some guys, you know, you really can't avoid getting hit with some big ones, but if you go in once, then the chances are you're going to go in again because it's a scramble. You don't have a lot of time in between those waves, and you're rattled. And the next time you remount, you may not be perfectly positioned. You know, your foot strap might be out of, you know, something could be a little off. So you go in again, um, you know, and then you go in a third or fourth time. And now I think most people at that point are getting pretty rattled. You know, I had a chance to talk with John. I know he was very shook up. Um, he had gone in 6 or 7 times. He was getting back surfed. You know, waves were pushing him, zigzag. He has his Garmin track, and you can just see this zigzag through this surf zone.
Well,
But
on a Garmin track, a zigzag is not a good sign.
no, no,
So I'm just going to kind of interject here, if I may. You're
yeah,
describing full-on conditions. Here's a gentleman, very, very experienced from Hawaii, and this is some of the toughest launch circumstances he's ever been in. He's from Hawaii, and the water's 48 degrees, which it isn't in Hawaii. Pardon me.
yeah,
And this woman named Mary turns around. She says, "Forget it. I'm not doing this." So can we just bump to this, Nick? I mean, why do some people keep going and some people turn around? I'm just going to spit it out here. I would have turned around. I wouldn't have
yeah,
blinked. It's like, it's supposed to be fun. I would have said, I'm not going to do this. But Nick Walton kept going. Do you want to talk about that? Because I mean, I think the listeners have gotten it here that this is full on and people are struggling and it's not safe right out of the gate.
yeah, yeah. Great question. You know, I know I'll speak quickly to John in that, you know, he was talking to him after the race, very upset with himself for not turning around. You know, he was dressed well. He had a full 3 mil wetsuit on. He was never cold, he said. Um, but he had swallowed some water and all that. You know, you're going to get some water in. Um, and he said, was like, damn it, I didn't drive 12 hours, you know, to get here and to turn around and go back. And gave it that one last push, did get out through the break and went on, you know, never had an issue the rest of the race. Once he got fully through. Um, so yeah, so you know, I didn't know Nick at all. I'd only met him one time before, but I had a chance to talk to a lot of his friends, the guys that were there with him, and you know, there's and I don't have an appreciation. I've never been in the in the canoe culture, but these guys, not only Nick but Brad and Matt, who were also there, very steeped in the marathon canoe um, world, and Nick was a very successful professional athlete in that space. And this is an area where they race 24 hours, 36 hours. It's uber competitive, and they're determined, they're driven, they're strong. They kind of don't give up, but you know, more importantly, one of the guys explained this to me, and it was enlightening, and you know, kind of how things work is in that canoe world, they paddle all winter. They go out in 40-degree water on the river. They fall in at times, but on a river, you know, you fall in, and the mentality is get back on the boat, paddle like hell, and you warm up. And so, you know, I think I don't want to speculate too much, but you can understanding that kind of helps. That you know, my theory is that you know the race starts. There's a ton of adrenaline. There's a ton of competitive. It's game on. It's a fight. It's a battle, and you know, but then within 10, 15 minutes, that cold exposure, that time in the water is creeping up on you, and you may not even realize it because there's so much adrenaline. But all of a sudden, you know, that starts to it catches up to you. It caught up to Brad. You know, he told me he was in and he's not joke. He's done the research. He's looked at all of his symptoms. He was in stage 2, stage 3 hypothermia in 20 minutes. Um, and so, you can kind of see how that could happen if you didn't turn around. It kind of could catch up. So, I think probably a lot of questions. What was Nick wearing? I think from talking to guys that were with him before the race, looking at some of the pictures, I think I understand he had a 2 millimeter shorty, which is shorts and short sleeve arms, but it covers the core. Over that, he had some pants. We don't know if they were, they weren't more than 2 mil. Maybe they were half mil. I don't know for fact, but he had those pulled over that. And then he had like a polypropylene top. So pretty light for I think he had he wore all the gear he had probably. Um, but for those conditions, that was light. That's not a full. He had booties on, but he did not have gloves. He did not have a hat or a balaclava, a hood. Um, and this is something worth spending a little bit of time and lessons, hindsight, and stuff. And it's a and maybe what I kind of seem to notice is that the sup guys, they tend to dress more like a surfer. They're kind of closer to the surf world, which is much warmer. If you're going to be a surfing, you can float out in those conditions all day long with the right wetsuit on for surfing. A 4-3 probably on that day with a hood. Um, but in surfski, even if we're not racing, we're always kind of trying to find the balance between, not overheating, um, and not having so much resistance, but yet being dressed to be in the water for, a length of time. And that's hard enough, just going out for a paddle. But then when you layer on top of that a race, where performance counts, where you're going to be redlining your heart rate, um, it's tricky. And for that, have friends that are kind of ethically opposed to cold water racing for that reason, because people, myself included. So I will tell you, I wore, and I had already been thinking about what I would wear earlier in the week and kind of making those plans. And okay, so I had 3 mil pants, I had a 1 mil top with a windbreaker vest, and then my race jersey over that. That's kind of what I had with me for the day. It was light on top. I had a neoprene hat, thick hat that I had on, but I didn't have heavy booties. I didn't have gloves. Um, so I was a little light to be spending, an hour in the water. And so that's tricky.
What you're saying is you're balancing race performance with safety. That's essentially what you're
Yeah,
saying here.
yeah,
Yeah, that's an interesting balance, isn't it? There's a fine line there, certainly. And the race organizer, you can start to look in their direction, but that's not usually their call to make. People, you can have required gear. In
yeah,
mountain running races, for example, there's required gear. You get gear checked at certain places. But personally, I think you can't abdicate personal responsibility. I'm just going to make my little personal statement there. And the race organizers have to do what they say they're going to do. You'll tell us whether they did that or not. But then everyone has to be in charge of their own safety, right? You can't ever abdicate your safety to somebody else.
yeah,
And so if someone goes in underdressed in 46 to 48-degree water, well, they made a mistake. I mean, that'd be my personal opinion. And then as I went to a few minutes ago, so why doesn't someone turn around? A number of people said, I don't got this, I'm going to turn around. That's what I would have done. But other people just say, I'm going to keep going almost no matter what. So it's like a choice. You see what I mean, Nick?
yeah,
Like there's the word accident, like you're out there, your rudder cable breaks. Oh my gosh, you can't control the boat. Or the squall comes in unforeseen on the radar and something goes really big. Accidents are part of life. You can't prevent accidents. But was this an accident? You see what I mean? The conditions were totally known in advance and it happened. So was this an accident or was this poor choices? I don't want to put you on the spot, or maybe I'm just asking a rhetorical question here.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I don't know, one thing I will add, and this kind of came about later, just the last few weeks, uh, kind of another twist or potential complication. The guy that retrieved the boat, um, ultimately, the Coast Guard, whoever picked it up, and then we got it back to a friend of Nick's in Lansing who had done some work on the boat, and he was gonna, get it fixed up, and then they're gonna sell it and give the money to Nick's daughter. Um, but he said that the rudder was compromised,
Ah,
and we don't know. So we don't know if the boat banged around before it got picked up. There was appears to be there wasn't a lot of other damage on the boat. Um, what a theory, a very plausible theory, is um, at the when Nick first launched, I think he got pushed back into the beach a little bit, and what I've seen happen when that happens, um, it puts a lot of torque on the rudder, and a lot of times, depending on the design, it can cause the rudder to twist the shaft to move in the tiller bar. So that this has happened to me before, as I know, years ago. And so it's completely off center, and usually right away that you can't paddle with that. Or if the rudder's not allowed to spin, and I have not seen the rudder myself, so this is just what I've heard, is that it had separated from the shaft. So the rudder is built with a metal shaft that goes down, and then a foam core, and it's carbon wrapped around that in a lot of them. That foam, with enough force, could break free of the shaft, basically. So it looks like it's on the boat, but it's actually loose. It's not, the carbon rudder is spinning on the shaft, basically. Um, it's possible that he that was not functioning, and it just made everything worse.
wow,
Um,
worse. I've been to
yeah,
Shaft before also, and it's like, whoa, this is not good.
yeah,
But I actually pulled a boat out. Actually, it was hitting a log on a river. So I pulled the boat out and it spent 15 minutes with other pieces of wood trying to straighten the shaft. So
yeah,
it's not helpful.
yeah. So I don't know how we could get final clarity. We've asked the guy who's got the boat maybe to do some video so we can look at exactly what he's seeing about the rudder. I don't know if we can ever know if it was that way, um, or if that happened, but while it was floating or something, I just not sure. But it is definitely, but it would only, you know, um, uh, combination of things, right? I think everybody we've talked to will tell you that Nick was extremely determined and extremely competitive and determined. And so you can, imagine with that mindset, okay, if I just get through this break, I'll put together a couple Ks, I'll warm up, um, everything will be fine. Every, you know, but what what commonly happens in surf ski incidents is that that cold sneaks up on you, and then your motor skills start to deteriorate, and then you can't balance the boat, and you miss a remount or two, or three, and it snowballs very, very, very quickly. Um, what kind of what we know for fact, is that we launched here. It turns out that uh, a friend of mine lives in this house. This was totally um, crazy coincidence. Lives in this first house here. She actually saw him floating, saw the boat, didn't see a paddler in it, called 911, about an hour after we started the race, because
So she's the one who called it in.
I don't know for a fact if there were other calls, but she called, and then actually immediately after that called me, not knowing I was even out there, but just knowing that I sell surf skis. She's bought a couple surf skis from me, kind of has some level of familiarity with it, and just thought maybe I might know about something going on. And so, yeah, I had that. I didn't see the voicemail for like a week, but I do have the voicemail, the timestamp, and I looked at it. It was, she called me after she called 911, and it was about an hour after we started the race. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the point, the point I want to make is that that's only about, if you only went, if you only got about a third in that first 300 meters, about a third of a kilometer offshore, that's about a one, 1.2, 1.3 miles of distance covered in an hour. So there wasn't, that would be a drift rate pretty much, I think, with that level of wind and current. So, I think we know that it wasn't ever really paddling much. It was a struggle in the surf. Um, and I just don't know if, you know, the, if they were tracking the whole time. Yeah, I know on social media there's a lot of concern about, well, people, did they just watch him? And I'm certain that's not the case. But with the commotion with the other two that were struggling, I can see that in the 6 foot waves, they may have somebody lost track of tracking him.
Right. Well, a lot of people lost track. I mean, we had trackers on shore who did not see him, apparently. You had a sweeper boat who did not see him. I'm not sure what other safety protocols were in place, but no one saw him until it was quite literally too late.
Yeah, so the call went in an hour, and then I think it's probably 40 minutes before the pickup. So I think it was about an hour and 45 to 50 minutes in the water, mostly in the water.
Hmm, that's remarkable. I mean, I'm just left with this image. Again, I want to really strongly emphasize. I feel for this gentleman, his friends, and his family. Obviously, he died, and no one wants your friend, your father, your husband. I don't know anything else about it to perish like this. So the utmost sympathy and condolences to them. And we're just trying to figure out how to keep this from happening again, right? I think you've identified hypothermia, and I personally have noted, wow, if you don't rely on someone else, if you don't have it, if you're not in control, it's time to go home. I come from a mountaineering background. I do a lot of climbing, and I just kind of have put in a little comment here that in the climbing world, to bail is a thing. I mean, the best in the world quit. I just got to emphasize this 10 times over. The best climbers in the world will come back and say, "How we go?" I said, "I'll be bailed. It just wasn't right." And everyone goes, "Yeah, good call." You see what I mean? I
Yeah.
just kind of want to put that out there, kind of pass it over from the world of climbing, mountaineering into the world of water sports, and say to quit is not a bad plan sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it definitely uh, is a lesson learned. There's no race worth that's worth that. Um, one of the things too is he didn't have a cell phone on him. Normally, all of us carry a phone. I think I heard he intended to. Kind of, he forgot it at the truck when they left this, when they staged the truck at the finish, and just didn't have time. Didn't go back for it. So he had no way to signal really. No flares or anything.
We should also call out a PLD, which if I'm in the real, I'm doing the Manitou Passage, going around the Manitous, things like that. I definitely always carry the phone, but I also carry a PLB, a personal locator beacon, which just goes right up the satellite. So in any conditions, you get that
Yeah.
through.
Yep. Yeah. I don't go offshore without one ever. Um, on Lake Michigan, carry the phone as you do the phone and the EPIRB always. Um, yeah. So, it's, there's a lot in hindsight's always hindsight. I mean, 2 millimeters more of neoprene A full three is a game changer. A wider boat, Nick was an experienced, I think it spent a lot of time in elite boats in flat water, but I don't think a lot of time in open, definitely not in 6 foot conditions. And, that was another thing we kind of assessing before the race who's got what and what's Nick paddling? He's got a think six. I didn't really know that boat. Somebody said, it's like a V8. I thought, okay. It's
I saw
not
the
a
photo.
V8.
It didn't look like a V8 in the photo.
No, it's more like a V9. It's more of an intermediate kind of 19-inch wide, which, some people may not think there's a big difference, but I've had experiences with people where it's night and day. The difference, 2 inches is monumental. A V8, uh, you know, um, would have made a world of difference in stability. I think there was also a pad in the boat, so that also would have made it less stable. I don't think, I saw in the pictures there was a pad in the boat. So that impacted stability of the boat, which would, also make it harder.
A pad is just insane. I mean, it's like a quarter of an inch changes everything. I always paddle with a pad, and as soon as it gets real, I pull it out, and all of a sudden you're just groovy. Everything's just fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, just a quarter inch makes a big difference.
Yeah. So, there is all those things. And, I think it's a tricky one. I think too, a lesson learned, and it's not actually uncommon in the paddling world that we have people that are very experienced and accomplished in flat water, that are moving over to surf ski, and it can be intimidating. Some of these guys, they're professional, they're far better than me or anybody else on flat water, and so there can be, kind of some hesitancy to, um, tell them that they don't belong or and stuff. And so, but lesson learned. I mean, if somebody doesn't have that experience, it just doesn't matter. And the cold, I'll tell you what. One of the things, I work with a lot of people, take a lot of people out. I'm always assessing how many remounts do I think they have, and Nick was somebody who could remount 50 times. He was that fit, that strong. So you kind of give him a little, a positive check there, it's like, okay, he's super fit. This guy can get back on the boat. I don't know that he knew the right way to remount. And I think in the end, no matter how fit, and obviously in cold water, that 4, 5, 6% body fat, whatever he was, that's actually not going to help in really cold water. And so those things come into play.
I should note, just as for the context for people listening, at that point, that was the 42nd fatality in Lake Michigan just so far that year.
This year. Yeah.
Yeah. 42 just in Lake Michigan alone, 100 for the Great Lakes at that point in time. And one of the people working to prevent these incidents from happening again, because they're a little too common. And she had a killer quote. Pardon me, I just might share her own quote. She wants everyone to know that, quote, whatever capabilities you have, know that Lake Michigan has more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good quote, and that kind of, I think that gets to a little bit of just to talk a little bit about culture and stuff, and I think in John, anybody who's been to Hawaii, and it's such a deep culture there around the ocean, and it is always this attitude and mentality and respect and this spirit, this idea that the ocean allows us, to play. We don't ever conquer it, and that's deep in the surfski community. We don't ever conquer these waves. We don't ever conquer Lake Michigan, the ocean. We're fortunate enough to go out, and it allows us to play, and but the respect. There's just has to be massive respect. And I think, people may not understand that too. If the listeners of this podcast do understand it, they're mostly surfski paddlers and stuff, but the outside world, there are these sort of masochistic races now. That's kind of a whole thing, right? The kind of death march, grueling, just break them down, kill them kind of races. That's not what we're trying to do in downwind, at all. And maybe that's different than people don't, understand or realize, but we are, always knowing that it's so much more powerful, that we will never conquer. Um, yeah, I think that's important. So that's definitely, yeah, I think I'll just address it because I know people are wondering, and I don't have all the facts about the safety boat, but what I understand is the jet ski did launch and pretty quickly just determined the conditions were too extreme, and he came in. So there was not a jet ski running the course. I don't know if the race directors knew that when it started or not. Um, it was not out there. We did not see the jet ski when we started. Um, but I think I don't know that any of the racers asked at that point either. So that's what that was.
Well, Nick, when it's not safe enough for the safety boat, something is not right. I mean, I kind of have to
Yeah,
say that. I mean, I wasn't there, but the safety boat can't launch because it's not safe enough. Then everyone else is very, very vulnerable.
yeah, yeah, and it's hard. I think we just because we don't run downwind races here, we don't have a culture of it. We're not connected with the first responders and the DNR, and tell you in South Africa and in Hawaii and those, they have very good systems. Cape Town, that we know, they all run an app on their phones. It's called Safety Tracks. It has a button on it that says I'm in trouble. Their rescue boats are out all the time in all kind of conditions. They they live for it. That's what they do. The surfski community, I think, does fundraisers to help improvements on the boat or buy the boat, or they're very tightly connected and they collaborate, and it's very effective. Everybody has that on their phone. They get in trouble, boom, they hit that. It's called the NSRI. They launch their craft, and they're out there, and they get to the paddlers, and we just don't. There was a boat that got called when the 911 call finally came in. So the DNR, and I see them here in Leland in the harbor. They have beautiful boats that are well capable of being out there. It seems like it's not as much in the mentality of those guys to go out there unless they have to, unless there is a rescue, and in Hawaii, I see these guys and they just bounce around in boats, and it's huge all the time, and they think nothing of it. The water is a lot warmer. I give them that, but it's just, so I kind of wonder, well, how come, the DNR must have issued the permit, but um, why couldn't they have had a boat out there? And, you know, another thing to keep in mind, it's for the race directors, is that they had 20 people signed up, right? So they had a race budget of $2,000. So they're really relying on volunteers. They can't afford to spend 5 grand to hire a qualified boat to be out there running up and down the course. And you know, it's going out on a huge limb to want to organize one of these races. I think the call to do it in October, I mean, the wind is the most consistent, right? And people that are going to travel for 10, 12 hours for a downwind, they want a downwind. They want this condition. So while, in hindsight, we could say, well, why didn't we should have spoke up. We should have canceled the race, and probably, but then, that leaves people that very upset because they drove 10, 12 hours to do this race. I mean, um, another, in hindsight, we could have, it was only 10, less than 10 of us. We could have decided, let's just do a group paddle here. Let's buddy up, um, and just go for a group paddle and have a beer afterwards. That, could have definitely, the better paddlers with the weaker paddlers partnering up, and then kind of the medium guys going together. Um, in the surf zone itself, there's not a lot on a surf ski you can do to help another paddler. The minute you stop paddling, you're pummeled, you're in the water. The waves don't stop. Maybe some of the really professional lifeguard guys, professional surf ski guys could manage it, but it'd be very hard, if not impossible. And odds are, if you tried to help a buddy in that surf break, you're going into very
No,
quickly.
you're gonna break your boat. I
Yeah,
mean, these are very brittle craft, very brittle hulls.
yeah,
Yeah, interesting. So what you're kind of saying is that it was this in between category. 20 people enter. There's not much money, and I personally always feel like supporting race directors. It's usually a thankless task. You don't make any money at all. I
right.
race a lot. I've done 14 races so far this year. So I love race directors. I want to support them. And this was in this tricky in between category because, on one hand, they got the conditions that they expected, but on the other hand, they weren't really prepared to support it. It's like you said, at 20 people, you can't hire a chopper, you can't hire a 30-foot pontoon boat, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes down, in my personal opinion, that we all have to take care of ourselves at some point.
Yeah, yeah. It really does. And talk to the, for a minute, man, maybe another lesson learned. So there was a vetting process, right? But and in hindsight, I mean, that's hard to do. People are going to tell you that they've got the experience, um, and you just don't know, when they show up on the day, uh, what the conditions are going to be, what kind of boat they're going to bring, whether or not they're going to have a pad in the boat, how they're going to be dressed. All these factors come into play, and so, uh, having done enough races, you just, uh, you see stuff, you just like could never imagine that somebody would get in trouble on this, and I've seen other races with very benign conditions, and you have somebody that's out there and they get in trouble. It's just, yeah, it's a difficult one. And I think, most of us, I think, do inherently align on the personal responsibility, and in surf ski in general, we do always look out for each other, and there are plenty of situations where, uh, you know, buddy system and stuff, others can help and play big roles. But also, a lot of us, do 99% of our paddling alone, and so it is just inherent. And maybe we take that for granted at times, but when I go on the water, I'm always assuming that nobody's saving me but me. You know, it's just
Yeah.
not. It's not on my mind at all. And there were guys from come down from Duluth, and kind of same kind of thing. They're out there on their own, all through the winter, big stuff, and you just that. And I think I didn't know Nick, but talking to people, it seems like he was the type that did also believe that. He's not wouldn't have been the type that thought that, he believed in personal responsibility. Um, just like the cold is a killer, and it just sneaks. It's amazing. I've been rereading a book. Maybe you've heard of it. Deep Survival came out years ago, maybe 15 years ago, um, and just all these survival stories, and kind of the premises: who survives and why, and it's just try to get your head around these people that survive some crazy ordeals in the mountains, and on the ocean, these 50 days adrift, or 3 days crawling down a mountain, with a broken leg, the Joe Simpson touching the void. You probably
Yeah. Yeah. No, I,
and
I read those when I started my particularly mountaineering career. literally it was 50 years ago. And I said, no, I don't want stories to tell my grandkids. I don't want to be telling any of these stories at all. And so, fortunately, I've steered clear of that fine line, stayed on the fun side of it. But Nick, I just want to also do a quick side note here. You've helped me out a lot. I think I'm just going to call you out right now. I know this embarrasses the heck out of you, but your blog is great. Your podcast is great. Personal lessons are great. And so someone has to say that you have really helped Great Lakes surf skiing tremendously. And so, speaking for many people, I want to thank you for what you are and what you've contributed.
Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate that. It is one of the things that I don't think about a lot, but as somebody, a promoter of the sport, the worst thing in the world that can ever happen is that somebody that you encourage to get into the sport gets into trouble. And I think that's something that maybe there's for all dealers everywhere, and or not just dealers, but anybody that's promoting the sport, that's a risk that they're taking in that promotion, is that they have to live with that. And so I do think about that. And I hadn't worked with Nick. I mean, he hadn't done lessons or bought anything or done any of the camps and stuff. And it was just devastating and gut wrenching, just that I was there, and I didn't have a formal role, but I wasn't a very experienced paddler there, and I had my concerns, didn't speak up enough, loud enough. And I think that, I'm not alone. I mean, I think there were a lot of people there that are saying coulda, woulda, shoulda, and there's 100 different things that 100, 20 different people could have said and done, could have led to a different outcome. But it does definitely reinforce everything, the blogs that I do, and the safety. And I won't stop. I'll continue to encourage people to explore downwind, but there's ways to do it. I firmly believe there's ways to do it safely, and it can be done. And it's just, like I've always said, long game. It's don't get too excited going too fast, too far. Just and it's 2 millimeters of neoprene, 2 inches of boat width. These things are the difference between life and death. And it's kind of another thread in the surf ski world that I do think about. Why even race? Why do you guys have to race? I know there's people that raise that question philosophically, and pick on Boyan. He's a friend of mine. He runs a phenomenal surf ski school in Tarifa, Spain. World-class instructor, world-class safety. He's probably the most put together guy in the world. And he's always challenging us. Why do you guys race? And so I think about that when something like this happens, and you kind of, on one hand you feel a little guilty, on the other hand I think at some level it's human nature to want to compete. And we had kind of given up on downwind racing, but this comes along and it's a chance. And people are going to do it because people, it is the process they're enjoying, but it's also fun to kind of verify that your process is taking you the right direction, right? And milestones in that process that racing can be, and so, and there is nothing more exhilarating than a good downwind race. Is it's incredible. I think anybody that's done it would agree, absolutely. And so but it's tricky. It's it's not, maybe
Well,
not
Rick,
for everybody to
you've
race.
done a lot of self introspection here and self reflection, which I want to call out because I appreciate that. I respect that. In my opinion, it's a sign of intelligence and courage. You could just kind of blow this off or go black versus white on it. You're not. You're questioning yourself. You're questioning the situation. You've left a lot of questions open, which, in my opinion, is a sign of intelligence from which good outcome and good learning can result. So my guess is the listeners are hearing this and making their own call, because ultimately that's what it is, isn't it? You don't make calls for anyone.
Yeah.
You don't We definitely don't want to do that.
No.
But I will say, I don't think anyone would assign any culpability toward you. You certainly were a very experienced person. You certainly had your doubts, but you had zero formal role. If you would have said, "Hey, I think we ought to do something else," people might have gone, "Oh, dude, it's none of your business." So,
No.
anyway, I just want to say, Nick, I think you did very well. I don't think you could have done any more. While at the same time, I respect that you have a lot of introspection around this.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's been, and it's not just been me. I've been talking to, some of the other experienced guys, talked a lot with Rob Hartman. He and I were very much in sync on all of it, leading up to the race and the race and stuff. And, he's having together, we've had a lot of these discussions, and call out Greg Green as well. I've talked to him. He's another extremely experienced, raced Hawaii and San Francisco and South Africa and the gorge, and he went in 3 times on the start. He went in, swam
Wow.
3 times. So um it was yeah. But yeah, we're all just trying to deal with it, make sense out of it, learn from it, um figure out how we can, get that message out. And I think hopefully it does land with others in the surfski community. um
Nick, I thank you for taking this time. And I want to also note that having you talk like this was my idea, because you will not ever talk about yourself and all your knowledge because you're a very humble person. So I just want the listeners to know I kind of prodded and requested that you share your story. So you're a very humble man, but you have very good knowledge. So I think people wanted to hear some of it.
Yes, I think, thank you for prodding me. I know, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, it's certainly, there are lessons to be learned, and we owe, we have a responsibility to the global community to put it out there. Um, like I said, I think there will be more. I think there's just a lot of themes. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of complexity, things to wrestle with before making judgments, and people will land where they land. But I think you want to do it the justice it deserves, to understand kind of everything. And actually, one of the guy from Hawaii is actually an author. So maybe there's, maybe he can do some justice to all this with a good write up. And that's always out there too. So yeah, I think there will be more to come. Maybe more facts will come as far as the details. It doesn't, none of it changes the outcome, but uh, cold water is brutal, and it sneaks up on you, and um, you can't let, whether it's a race or anything else, uh, cloud decision making. And yeah, turning around is not a sign of weakness. It's, you know,
It's definitely not a sign of weakness. Nick, I want to again express condolences to Nick Walton, his friends, his family, his coworkers. A terrible tragedy there. And again, thanks to you for sharing this knowledge and also helping me learn how to surf ski. And lastly, I hope I see you out there. I mean, I love this sport. Lake Michigan. Hello, everyone. Lake Michigan. What we didn't talk about is that there's no rocky cliffs. If you get washed up on the shore, it's actually you're in a white sand beach. So there's a whole upside here. We've talked about 48-degree water, but it also can be 78 degrees walking barefoot in the sand and still surfing waves. So I
yes,
hope I see you out there, Nick.
yes, it is erratic. I was out today, and here we are, November 1st. Um, no boots, no gloves, no hat. It was warm, 65. And actually, I looked, and I'll just have let's notice just the temp that day was only 2 degrees warmer than our average temperature in December. So it really was kind of unseasonably cold at that point on that day, which is, adds to the unfortunateness of all this. But it was rare for that, not rare for Lake Michigan to be that temperature, but at that time of year, um, it was. But yeah, no, we have beautiful, beautiful paddling, and I'm still at it. Still getting out there, still will. So,
I
all
hope
right.
I see you out there in person.
Yes, for sure. We got to get you in the back of the tandem, the double.
Okay.
That'll be fun. So, all right. Well,
Thank you,
thanks,
Nick.
Buzz. I really appreciate it. Cheers.